Here's John Carlson on Talk Radio 570 KVI.
Amtrak 501 answering Centralia North, over.
Hey guys, what happened?
We were coming around the corner to take the bridge over I-5 there, right north into Squally, and we went on the ground.
Is everybody okay?
I'm still figuring that out. We got cars everywhere and down onto the highway.
In other words, that would be a no. Everybody not okay. Ladies and gentlemen, John Carlson, hour number 2, the Commute with Carlson, Talk Radio 570 KVI. Lines open for you here, 206-421-5757. If you want to get an idea of just how severe that turn is, grab a Seattle Times, turn to page 10 in the A section, and you can see it's not like a banked, sloping, gradual turn. It's a pretty sharp turn. And we've got that tweeted out at KVI Seattle, if you want to see a picture of that. Daniel Konzelman, an accountant, bright young man, Eagle Scout, was driving to work when all of this happens right in front of him. And again, being an Eagle Scout, he springs into action. I've been telling you for a long time, I think the two best organizations around are the Salvation Army and the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts, for a couple of reasons, and Girl Scouts too, of course, but the Boy Scouts get boys off the couch and into the outdoors where they need to spend more time. And secondly, they teach them life skills, first aid skills, which hopefully will always stay with them. And that is definitely the case with Dan. You'll be hearing more in just a moment. First, let's bring him aboard. Good morning, Mr. Konzelman. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm doing great. It's an honor to get to be on your show.
It's a real pleasure having you here. What troop did you do your scouting in?
I was part of Troop 174 initially in Puyallup, and then for probably the last 4 years of scouting, I was a part of Troop 604 out in Eatonville.
Okay, wonderful. How old are you, Dan?
I'm 24 years old.
24, okay. You're headed to work. Take us there yesterday.
Yes. Headed south on I-5, parallel to the train tracks, and I noticed that the train went by us at a high rate of speed, so high that I've never really seen a train on those tracks going so fast. And probably 30 to 40 seconds later, came to the bridge, and there was a traffic jam, and I looked up and I saw the train hanging off of the bridge, and took a second to collect myself and realize, wow, there's been a major accident. And as fast as we could weave out of traffic, we drove backwards up the on-ramp and around to the bluff that overlooked the tracks. And we just had to make a decision. Are we going to go down and help, or are we going to go to work? Because at that point we were past the traffic, and we could have done either. And I think both Alicia Hoverson and I decided we need to go help. So luckily I had a little emergency kit and grabbed my headlamp and my boots. And
was it dark outside still?
It was about 7:40 a.m. So it was. Okay, so it was kind of. I don't know what time the sunrise was. It was getting kind of pre-dawn, and
it's getting light, but it's not light.
It was correct, yeah, and it was kind of foggy down by the Nisqually Flats. So the main thing was I knew that if I went into the train cars, they would probably be pretty dark. And so one of I think the Boy Scout motto is "Be prepared." So I wanted to do a quick assessment of everything that I might need. And
well, there you go. So he has a headlamp. Okay. So you decide you're going to get involved. Now what happened?
At that point, we had probably a quarter mile from where we were up on the embankment down a wooded hillside onto the tracks and to the trains. So we hightailed our way down through the woods to the train tracks, ran along the train tracks to where the bridge was with the trains on it. And at that point, I had assumed, because it had probably been 5 minutes, that there was probably some people there helping, and that hopefully police or somebody would be there sort of regulating the situation and keeping people calm, but there was nobody. especially up on the tracks. And there was people staggering out of the train cars with head injuries and having trouble breathing. And so right away, Alicia Hoverson and I just started to engage each of the victims, assess their injuries, and try to take them down to the road where we had hoped that the medics would arrive soon, which they did. And we just.
Now,
you just kind of have to.
Was it noisy, or was it quiet?
It was eerily quiet.
Okay.
It was, none of the victims were screaming or yelling. I think everybody was pretty much in shock.
Okay.
And nobody from down below was screaming or yelling on the freeway, and there was no cars driving by. It was very eerie.
Now, when you come upon the scene, you're literally looking at a dozen train cars that had gone off the tracks. How did you choose where to go first?
We went to the closest one to us. There was two that would turn sideways on the bridge. Those are the first ones we went to. There was no way to get into them because both of the ends of the train cars were hanging off, suspended over the edges of the bridge. And so one of the broken out windows, luckily there was no glass. They have sort of like safety windows that come out in one piece when they break.
Okay. So
I didn't cut my hands, but I climbed through the window, which is about 8 feet off the ground, to see if there was anybody still stuck inside. And there was people in almost all the cars I went into, some in varying levels of injury. But yeah.
Now you said that, and again, people in shock, people with head wounds, blood streaming, off their heads. A lot of them had hip injuries, broken ankles, etc. You said there was a gentleman who couldn't move, and another lady with a head injury in shock. The man who couldn't move, was it because of a back injury or because he was trapped?
I think there was two gentlemen in different train cars that I came upon that couldn't move. One of them was a younger gentleman. He thought that he had a lower back and a neck injury, and he couldn't move his body really at all. And I think being in shock is sort of paralyzing in and of itself, and he probably got thrown around when the train collided with the bridge. So I don't know exactly what injuries he has, but if somebody says their neck or back hurts, you treat it like a back injury or a neck injury, and you don't try to move them unless they're in immediate danger of fire or flood. So, do
you know what became of him?
I jumped out of the train to try to find a ladder because he was 8 feet up. I couldn't carry him and jump down out of the train with him. So we had to get more people into the train car to help him. And it was at that point that the paramedics started to arrive. And I told them we need a ladder. There's somebody with a neck and back injury up in that first car. And he said, all right, we got it covered. So at that point, I moved on to the other side of the tracks where the trains had kind of capsized and sort of burst open.
Okay, you found one of the train attendants who you said was just shivering and in shock.
Yes. He was stuck inside. One of the tables had butted up against him, and he was pinned with, I think, he said his hip was hurting and his lower back, and if we moved him at all, he just would wince in pain. And he was sweating but shivering at the same time, saying, I'm so cold, I'm so cold. So I stayed with him for probably 2 minutes and tried to show other people how I had gotten into the car until there was people to stay with him. And there was clothing and bags everywhere jostled around the train. So I was able to find a couple coats to cover him with to keep him warm, and just rubbed his back and held his hand and just said, you're doing great. We're going to get you out of here. I think you're going to be just fine. You look good. And he had said that when the train impacted, he had gotten flung against one of the tables in the trains, and that's what hurt his hip. And then he had gotten flung and hit his head too. So it was from the sound of it was a very violent impact, and some people hit many things before they came to their final resting place.
Dan Konzelman, who is a Puyallup resident and an Eagle Scout, was there on the scene, getting involved, helping people, rescuing people, staying with people who were traumatized. Now we've got to get to the grim part. You came upon a fifth car that had flipped over. You and an officer punched through a window to get inside, and that's where you began to find dead bodies.
Yeah, so this particular train had flipped upside down, and the roof had kind of imploded, and unfortunately everybody that was inside was either killed or pinned underneath the train car.
Underneath the car itself?
Yes, so it had flipped upside down, and the roof had ripped open, and it sort of dumped everybody out, and then it hit pieces of the train or the train itself had come down to rest on top of some of them. So two of the people that were still alive were pinned underneath either debris from the train or the train car itself from the waist down. And you could talk to them, you could hold their hand, but you couldn't. Their legs were just gone underneath the rubble or underneath the train car. Another gentleman, he was a lucky guy because he was literally right where the train car would have landed, but there was just a little space about a foot tall where he was laying under, and nothing was touching him. He was just laying like I don't know if you were belly crawling in the army. I don't know. Yeah, and he had a broken femur and I think a shattered hip on the right side, so he couldn't move, but he wasn't pinned or trapped. And that was the hardest situation for me, because while we were working with those people, there's not a lot you can do for them, so you just kind of have to sit with them. But B, it's sort of sickening to be sitting right next to somebody who's helping somebody who's alive, but maybe a foot away from, I don't know, somebody who is deceased, or sort of a graphic scene. And that was. Were
the fatalities people who had been crushed?
A couple of the people had been crushed, yes. One of the gentlemen, or one of the people, was sort of in the midst of the rubble, and you couldn't really see a whole lot, but you could tell that there was somebody there. Another gentleman had been thrown from the train car, and he was one of the first deceased that we found. And then another gentleman was sort of buried underneath the rubble, and in the process of digging the people who were pinned out, we found him, and he was already gone when we found him. So I think all three of the fatalities were in that car.
They've not made identifications. Can you give us just a very rough idea describing the victims' gender, age, etc.?
Well, I actually know one of the victims. I don't know if I'm at liberty to give names right now. But I was in Bible study fellowship with his son, and he messaged me while I was on site and asked if he had seen his dad. And he sent me pictures of his dad, and honestly, I didn't really want to focus on the faces of the people who were deceased. This is kind of a haunting thing. But when I got back home and I messaged him back and asked him, "Hey Ben, did you ever find your dad?" He messaged me and said he didn't make it, and immediately I knew exactly who he was.
So one of the deceased in the car where you were helping people was his father?
Yes. Yep. A gentleman I was in Bible study with probably 3 years ago. I think it was his father. They have the same last name. He didn't expressly say that it was his father, but from the message, I took that it was either a close family member or his father.
And the other two victims?
The other two victims, I did not get a look at their face. One of them, you could only see a hand sticking out of the rubble, and the other one, you could only see him from the chest up.
But it was obvious to you that he was deceased.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, and by that time when we were going through the rubble, the paramedics were there, and they were able to make pretty clear and concise decisions as to whether they were gone or not. So I just took them at their word, and we focused on the people that were still alive and we could communicate with, and focus on getting them out.
Now, you stayed with the people who were pinned for about 45 minutes, and you left when the emergency responders were able to extricate them. In other words, you stayed with them until someone who could do more to help them arrived on the scene.
Yep. So my goal, my heart was breaking for these people in the first place, and my brother and I were both driving south on I-5, and we're within 5 minutes of the train colliding with our cars. So it was a very personal experience, and every person I saw, I was just A, thankful that they were alive, and B, thankful that nobody in my family was injured. And so every person I came across, I saw it as an opportunity to do to them what I would want them to do unto me. And so with those people, there's not a lot you can, the people that were pinned, there's not a lot you can do to actually help them. But at that time, I just wanted to do what I would have wanted them to do for me, which was just be with them. And I grabbed the gentleman's hand who was pinned from the waist down, and I just talked with him. I asked him what his kids' names were and what his wife's name was, and asked him, I told him, "You look great. Like, what can I do to make you more comfortable? You're a champion. You're doing so good. You're staying calm. Like, I'm so impressed with you. You're amazing." Just pep talk. They listen to you. Like, I remember one of the gentlemen who was covered in blood head to toe, but could still walk. Luckily, I told him, "You look so good." He's like, "Really? Wow, thank you." And I was like, "Well, I mean, you look okay." But
Sure.
to him, you are the voice of truth, and you are what you say is what they believe. And so I think just being encouraging, staying calm, and then just sort of, I guess, loving on them as much as possible.
Yeah.
I remember the guy that was pinned, I was like rubbing his back and I was holding his hand and was just talking to him. And I said, you know what, just relax, make yourself as comfortable as you can. It might be a while before we are able to get an airbag or something to get you out. And so, yeah, he stayed calm. I stayed calm, and the paramedics arrived, and they sort of took over. And I think probably 25 minutes later, that guy was extracted.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. Now, you worked your way through 4 cars, and it was in the 5th car where you came upon the fatalities. Do you have a rough idea, Dan? Dan Konzelman is my guest. He's both a witness and a hero here who ran out of his car to help victims after the derailment. Do you have an idea of how close to the front of the train the car was where the fatalities were suffered?
I don't, John.
Okay, I'm wondering, was it close to the front of the train, or was it closer to the back of the train?
It was closer to the front. So the front had gone off the right side of the tracks, and the 4 cars that I worked through were sort of trailing the head locomotive.
Right.
And then I think that the 2 cars that had gone sideways onto the bridge were probably cars 6 and 7 in line. And so the car that was sort of suspended, that had flipped upside down, that was sort of teetering between the bridge and the roof of probably the 3rd locomotive. I'm guessing it was connected to the trains that had turned sideways on the bridge, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I'm guessing it was probably between car 7 and 11, one of those cars. Yeah.
Okay. I guess this is a real good, strong testament to the usefulness of the Boy Scouts.
I would agree. And I think that everything in Boy Scouts teaches you to be prepared and to be wise and to stay calm and to take care of people. Just all of the first aid merit badges and the emergency preparedness merit badges and the life-saving merit badge, all those things, it's like I always say I got a college education in life-saving, pretty much. I was in Boy Scouts from age 11 to age 18. Every not every weeknight, but one weeknight every single week, I was at Boy Scouts learning, and during the week they would give us weekly assignments to get the merit badges done and all the different ranks in Boy Scouts. And so,
well, Dan, I think that you really did your community and the Boy Scouts proud, and also I can't tell you how grateful I am to hear that you were able to help so many people. Wonderful having you as a listener, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you so much, John. I grew up listening to your show, and it's an honor to get to speak with you.
That's Dan Konzelman, Puyallup resident, accountant, Eagle Scout, who ran toward the danger, right? That's how you know you're heroes. They run toward the danger and helped rescue people, helped calm others as they were awaiting medical treatment. You're listening to The Commute with Carlson, Talk Radio 570 KVI.